You're listening to Answers from the Akashic Records, a world of empowerment service from Aingeal Rose Ahonu.
You are very welcome. I am Ahonu, and with me is my lovely Aingeal Rose. And tonight we are dealing with 19 questions. And the questions are quite varied, but they cover everything from the Earth's connection to the Pleiades. We're going to be talking about President Donald Trump. We're going to be talking about reincarnation and people have asked questions actually to elaborate about previous recordings that we've done of Answers from the Akashic Records. Now this is session number 10, and for our newcomers it's important for you to know that Aingeal Rose is not in a trance when she is downstepping this information. She is not listening to entities, angels, archangels or ascended masters. She is simply downstepping this information directly from source through the Akashic Records. And anybody who'd like to listen in to our previous recordings, we recommend you go to our website at answersfromtheakashicrecords.com, or you'll find links on our World of Empowerment website at worldofempowerment.com. You can also contact us through Stitcher Radio or iTunes, and we would recommend that you subscribe so you never miss an episode. And please, when you do subscribe, do leave a little review, because it's those reviews that are so important to recommend to other people to listen and subscribe. So Aingeal Rose, she starts with a prayer, which she says partly out loud and the other part to herself, and then we will begin with the first question. So Aingeal Rose, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Ahonu. All right, Ahonu, but I first want to say that as I'm saying the prayer, the room is filled with red light. And in the past, when we've seen red, we've thought that it usually has something to do with the physical dimension, the 3D Earth dimension. But what I'm feeling tonight, though, is a blanket of anger across the world. So when you do get to those world questions, that's probably what we're going to be addressing.
Okay, let's begin with the first question then. It is, what is Earth's connection to the Pleiades?
All right, give me a second. It's interesting that Source considers it one solar system. So it wants to include the Pleiades and the Earth planets and some other galaxies in the whole mix. In other words, it considers it one solar system. So when I feel the Pleiades, it's very much like it's all one family. The Pleiades and the Earth planets. Looks like it's all, like I say, one huge galactic family, with interactions with Pleiadians being on the Earth when it was new and helping to seed a lot of the plant life here, and even doing some experimentations with animals and other life forms. So beings from the Pleiades have a hand in the fauna, the flora, the animals, not so much the genetic manipulation of humans, though. It doesn't seem like that. It seems like they were more here en masse when the planet needed to be seeded with trees, plant life, that sort of seeding. Okay, so they've come and gone a lot. There are Pleiadians here now. Some of us are Pleiadians who are here as advanced healers, as genetic scientists. So there's always been this relationship. But Source considers it all one huge galactic family. And they're even including Lyra in this too. I don't know much about Lyra, but it seems like Source considers a solar system a very large conglomeration of galaxies. So I hope that answers the question. Okay.
Super. Our next question. I have heard about the divine energies called Alpha and Omega. Can you tell us a bit more about these?
Okay, well, very quickly, Source says it refers to Father, Mother, God. So if you say that there's original Father, Mother beings, divine parents, if you will, that is true. Okay, that is true. That's how Source refers to those terminologies. They've also been called other things as well. It just means one being with two principalities. Does that make sense to you?
Okay, our next question moves straight into the world of US politics, Aingeal Rose. So we're going to get down and dirty here.
In the red energy?
In the red energy, indeed, that you opened with. Perhaps that was a foretend of what was to come.
Yeah.
How does Trump, as a role model, affect this generation of children?
Oh, boy. Okay.
And just let me say, I don't mean to be disrespectful. I'm just reading the question as it was written. I should perhaps have said, how does President Trump, as a role model, affect this generation of children?
Yes. Okay. So what I hear Source saying is it isn't determined yet. The influence seems to be more about what the parents of those children, where their consciousness is in relation to President Trump, what they say to their children. And I'm talking about young children, really. I'm talking about young children up to preteen, for example. In terms of they listen to their parents' opinions about it and other people's opinions, but I don't think they've actually come to a conclusion themselves. I have to say that they don't look like they are reasoning stuff that's going on with Trump. And a lot of them don't even hear about it. Okay, the parents don't talk about it. But the ones that do, for those ages, are influenced by their parents or possibly even teachers. And the opinion seems to be mixed out there with those people. Now, when you get up into teenage years, where those teenagers can make up their own minds, some agree with him, most don't, though. I find this interesting. It looks like most teenagers don't like President Trump's policies on human rights. Okay, they have take offense to that. So they're not agreeing with the things that he does that they feel, harm people's rights. Okay, that's their general opinion. And actually, there's a lot of teenagers who have pretty animated conversations about it. But what Source is really saying is it really gives credit to a lot of teenagers across the world because a lot of them are very common sense oriented. Okay, in other words, they seem to have the ability to discern things that aren't right. And I feel like that's part of a new generation already. They seem to be smarter than we were possibly at those ages and can catch things that aren't correct. Okay, now that doesn't take away the militant faction. There's militant factions of teenagers, okay, that are going to grow up to be young adults that might continue a militant type of behavior, okay? But the majority, anyway, seem to be reasonable. So I don't know that he affects those young people. In other words, their behavior doesn't seem to be changing because he's not always respectful, if you know what I mean. They seem to have some really good common sense in them. That's the way it looks right now. But, what I'm also hearing is you're always going to have militant faction people. Some people are just wired that way. So they may take some of his drastic opinions and attitudes and adhere to them and use him as a role model. Okay, but they seem to be in the minority in comparison to the world. Okay,
our next question. I believe everything in general moves us forward, but I'm puzzled as to how this presidency helps us move forward.
What I'm hearing Source say is all of this is really our lessons in ego and perspective. We're going to be confronted very, very soon with the issue of peace. Because it's going to intensify to the point where, what the heaviness that is associated with some of President Trump's policies, let's just say the reversal of progress with some of those policies in terms of humanity and its evolution, is going to compact in on itself, it's going to get so oppressive that either the people will do something about it or they'll allow themselves to be enslaved. And that's not saying that everything that he's trying to do is oppressive, because some of it isn't. But in terms of progress for humanity and the world, really, because the world is affected by President Trump, our relationships with the world, our relationships with leaders. On the one hand, he's causing collapses in areas that should be collapsed. On the other hand, he's doing things that support his elite friends and people and corporations. So we're going to have to separate out what's okay and what's not okay. So there's a huge, big balancing act going on right now in terms of what are the people going to do. So we have some oppression coming up, that's the word Source is giving me, some oppression that we're going to have to sift through and make decisions about. So how it can progress us forward is if we take a stand for what is right and healthy. In other words, here's an example, even though he's cutting funding to, let's say, clean water or clean air or the environment, things like that, in a way, it doesn't stop anybody from still doing things to clean the environment or keep the water clean. What I'm hearing Source say is, why do you need a law that makes you keep your environment clean and your water clean when it should be the responsibility of each human and each company to naturally do that? The opinion of a lot of people, if he passes a law that says there's no regulations or very few regulations now, whether it's drugs or water, and everybody runs amok and corporations run amok, whose fault is that? It's the people's fault. The good part of this could be that if your government takes away funding to keep the water clean and the environment clean, but corporations and people themselves pick up the ball and take it upon themselves to keep those things clean, that's evolution. That's evolution. That's true evolution, because what it shows is that the consciousness of the people are not irresponsible. So it's great potential here, but it does look like we have a president who's pushing and shoving in ways that are not healthy, and some of them are not even based on common sense. As we see this chaos, it's not just what he's doing, it's how people are reacting to what he's doing. And that's the point. The point is we're all responsible for our reactions in terms of, do we contribute to health and peace, or do we contribute to war and division? It's almost like, even if you go back a couple years, there's been conversations with Source about how there's a separation going on in the world. Okay, people are falling either to one side or the other, and we can certainly see divisions going on now in that way. It's like we have to come to a place where if the whole world starts to become affected and oppressed, then ultimately it has the potential to bring us all together, to unite, to make the choice to have a happy, healthy planet. So it's got incredible possibility. But if we sit still and fall back into complacency, then we're going to have problems. I hope that answers that for you.
Okay, our next question. And this is one of my own, and I need to give a little bit of background with this. Many people have seen the DeathEaters in the Harry Potter film. I don't know which particular episode it's from, but in one of the Harry Potter films. And these are these evil, ghoulish creatures. And I've actually seen them in my own meditations recently. But I've also seen them on places like YouTube, where people have reported seeing them imprinted in the clouds and in the sky in various places around the world. And what I want to know is, are they real, or are they some kind of a holographic imprint, or is that evil?
Let me just check here. They are real. They're not a holographic insert. Source calls them spectrals for some reason. Spectrals that are floating. And part of this is that we do have denizens coming up from beneath the earth. We look around at earth changes, for example, and we're looking at many places around the world where the earth is cracking open, miles down. The earth is opening up in places. We've got more earthquakes. We've got land masses changing. And with that, there are entities that are being released from under the earth. So they are real. In terms of how harmful they are, what I'm feeling is not very powerful, actually. They appear worse than they are. And their motive is to frighten. But honestly, I'm really hearing Source saying, do not give that a lot of power, because on the scale of 1 to 10, in terms of their ability to affect, I'll give them a 5. But we may see more of that, actually. But not frequently. Like, you're not going to see the sky filled with them. You're not going to see this go on every day. But you will see sightings. But what I'm getting, it's beings who have been underground in various dimensions who are now popping up. And, I also have to say that they don't seem like they can sustain their life force energy above the surface. So it's a temporary thing. Do you know what I mean?
Well, thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah.
I'm just taking this little note before we continue. Okay, our next question. Can we reincarnate into cartoon types of reality?
Not with the existing spirit that you have now. Okay, because when I present that to Source, I get a very fast impression of artificial. That's the word it's giving me, artificial. Cartoon characters are artificial with no real life force, energy of their own, no real spirit. So I'm going to say no to that question.
Okay. If one incarnates into this earth reality, and due to a progressive series of bad choices, like becoming hooked on drugs or alcohol, or having a criminal record, etc., is it okay to commit suicide and come back again, or go to another reality in order to save any further damages to your soul's evolution?
All right, well, there's a few things in there. We read it again first, because the second part where the person's saying in order to save your soul evolution, that seems to be another subject. So just give me the first part first.
Yeah. If one incarnates into this reality and due to a progressive series of bad choices, is it okay to commit suicide and come back again in order to save any further damage to your soul's evolution?
All right. I have to be careful here, because I don't want the message to get across that we're giving anybody permission to take themselves out. Okay? We're not doing that. In terms of what's okay and what's not okay with Source doesn't judge like that. So is it okay to take yourself out? No one's going to tell you that you can't take yourself out. You won't be judged for it in terms of you won't go to hell or anything like that, or purgatory, or, but the real issue is that it's not an escape from your consciousness. You see, because your spirit continues on and your consciousness continues on, you don't escape from the fact that we're all here to achieve mastery. Lifetimes are to progress further and further into God realization. And you can have lifetimes where you make bad choices and you regress yourself. But when you reincarnate, you have the opportunity to make different choices. If you're a person who's not making better choices now in your lifetime and you take yourself out, it's not going to erase your challenges. It might give you a reprieve off the earth plane, for example, but like attracts to itself that which it is. So eventually, if you come back, you could set circumstances up for yourself where you're maybe not challenged so hard. You could make it an easier life for yourself in that way, but it's not going to erase the mastery that we all need to be working towards. I mean, you can delay it if you want to. No one's going to tell you that you can't quit your contract in a lifetime if you want to quit it. But it's not going to go away. Sooner or later, and it could be later, you will have to deal with those things and master them. The form might not be the same, but the challenge will be. But you can go rest if you want to. You can take yourself out, but you can't escape from yourself, is really the answer. It might end your temptation to addictions and things like that. But when you have addictions and you make bad choices or things that weaken your energetic template, when you cross over, you may go to a place of healing where you're put back together and strengthened. But when you come back into another lifetime, those areas will still be weaknesses and vulnerabilities. So you'll have to strengthen yourself through different choices eventually. Does that make sense?
Yes, indeed. Okay, I would actually take this opportunity to refer our listeners to other episodes that we've done where we have addressed the issue of suicide in great detail. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and indeed, in the series of books that we're now publishing, 10 of which are complete at this point in time, out of 100 in the Answers from the Akashic Record series, I know that suicide was addressed in Volume 1, and I believe it's also addressed in Volume 3 and perhaps even in 6 and 7 as well. So you can get those on Amazon.com, or you can find links to them from our website at worldofempowerment.com.
I want to just elaborate on this just a little.
Sure.
If I could. I want to make it clear that you will still learn when you cross over into spirit. Okay, so things that could have been very hard choices here, you will spend time on the other side. If you commit suicide, there will be a time when you go to what's called the plane of reflection. Now, it's not a judgment place, but it's a place where you're by yourself and you take time to reflect on yourself, because there's still lessons to be learned. And I know somebody who committed suicide, and I watched that person's progress for 2 years after the fact. And there was a time when this person did arrive at a realization of service to others. That was that person's lesson. And it was a victory for that soul in spirit. So it did not have to reincarnate to learn that. It learned it on the other side. So that can happen, okay? I just wanted to make that clear, because for some people it is very, very, very difficult. When you have addictions and you have things like that that are darknesses, your will is weakened. Your own ability to choose kind of goes away. So you do need to ask for higher help. But it is true that if you sincerely ask Source or, an immortal avatar like Babaji for help, and you sincerely want to get better, you will be helped. So I have to say that, okay?
Okay, the next question is quite a long one. So bear with me while I read this. I was just listening to a radio broadcast you did on YouTube called Is the Tunnel of Light a Trick? Especially part 1 of 3. I just want to tell you of my experience once, and this was not a dream. I was lying in my bed, just relaxing. All of a sudden, I felt like I was being dragged out of my body from my head. I then looked down on my body and saw myself as a reptile in human form. And then, separately, I was stabbed a few years ago and had a life-saving operation. I recall going into the tunnel towards the white light. I can remember shouting, "F off, you bastards, you are not having me yet." And I turned around and ran away. I later found out that I died in the operation and they had to resuscitate me. I don't believe in religion, but whilst in the hospital there was this beautiful young lady in a blue uniform with black curly hair who used to talk to me every night. When I went to have my stitches out 2 weeks later, I was late and I decided to say thank you to the nurses on the ward that took care of me by taking them some flowers and chocolates. When asked about the nurse who used to talk to me, they said there was no nurse there with black curly hair. Can you explain this to me?
Well, I don't have the person's name, and I'm not in their personal records. But it's very clear that it was some spirit being who was there to help him. Is he or she?
I don't know for sure.
Okay. So whether it's a guardian angel, definitely you would say that it was some higher being that was there to help them through that.
So this person, perhaps you could say, witnessed a miracle, really.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Our next question. When a being after the life review says that you need to reincarnate because of something you did in this lifetime, and you answer, no, what you are saying is a lie, I choose not to reincarnate, what happens then? Will that power force you back?
It depends on your own will, is what I'm hearing. You know, when you say no, there is no being that has the right to force you back anywhere. You have to say no and you have to mean no. Normally, in divine order, that being does not have a right to send you back without your permission. And that brings up the subject of karma, Ahonu, which is a whole other subject, really, because that's sort of a statement or meeting a being that would tell you to go back because of something you did. You know, now we're into karmic influences. And karma is the law of cause and effect. However, we have to remind people that the law of forgiveness and grace is higher. So you don't have to go back and experience something you did to somebody else. I know there's belief systems that say that, but it's not really how it is. Because whenever you ask for forgiveness and you truly understand what's gone on, that karma is erased for you if you're truly in a place of wanting to be forgiven and asking whoever you harmed for their forgiveness, even if you're asking spiritually or energetically and not physically. You see, the only time you come back and experience something you did to somebody else is because you're not in compassion. You don't have any remorse. You don't take any responsibility for your impact on other people. Then you may come back and the law of like attract like comes into play. But if you're understanding that your choices weren't the best and you ask for forgiveness and you've learned compassion out of it and a greater sensitivity or greater love, then you don't have to experience that.
Okay. In one of your most recent videos, Aingeal Rose mentions that the spirit or the soul of Abraham Lincoln is presently in a body. So was his soul tricked into coming back?
No, it was not tricked. And, I think we're on this theme here, and let me just interject this. Most souls are not tricked into coming back. If we remember, I just have to say this, in that Tunnel of Light podcast that we did, somebody asked about the Tunnel of Light, and the way Source explained the Tunnel of Light was it was when a person is dying and the cells collapse inward. As they're dying, there's a vortex that's created inside the cells, and the experience of going through a tunnel is what that is. Okay, so we have to be clear of what Source said about the Tunnel of Light, okay? Do some beings get tricked into coming back? Maybe so, but it would be happening in some astral dimensions before their spirit is actually released to the higher planes. And it's the reason, let's remind people, of why praying for the dead is a good idea. People who cross over do need prayers. They need energy to get through the bardo. Now, some people who are very evolved spiritually won't need that. They'll have their own spiritual thrust to get to where they have to go.
Okay.
Okay, but with Abraham Lincoln, no, I'm not saying that he was tricked to come back. He came back to be a young boy. He's a young boy, and he's got his own plan, which I don't feel I have the permission to go into.
Okay.
Now, this session is taking a little longer than usual because we've got such great questions in the lineup, Aingeal Rose. So let's take a quick little studio break here and gather ourselves, get a glass of water, and we'll be right back after this break. Don't go away.
Years of research, thousands of profound statements, hundreds of sessions, miles of transcripts, months of listening, a vast archive of personal power and spiritual awareness awaits you. Join worldofempowerment.com today, a members-only website of practical spirituality for your fast-changing world. worldofempowerment.com.
Ahonu's book, The Reincarnation of Columbus, is his true story of the loss of his first child, his pain and struggle with grief, and the guilt that followed. It forms his entire philosophy of life, and is a superb rendering of the unfolding of spiritual awareness. The Reincarnation of Columbus is a true epic voyage from the pain and sorrow of a father's grief to a new world of empowerment, love, and forgiveness. Get your copy on Amazon.com or on Kindle for $2.99 by searching for AHONU, or visit http://thereincarnationofcolumbus.com. That's all one word, thereincarnationofcolumbus.com.
Our next question. It seems that meditation could be a weapon in this life to defeat any lies archons might want you to believe. What thoughts should one use in a meditative state that would help you in your journey in the afterlife that you could use now?
Read that again for me, Hunter.
It seems that meditation could be a weapon in this life to defeat any lies the archons might want you to believe. I'm assuming in the afterlife, yeah? So what thoughts should one use in a meditative state that would help you in your journey in the afterlife that you could use now? In other words, I think this person is asking about what kind of preparation in a meditative state could you do so that you wouldn't be taken over by the lies and influences of archons in the next life.
Source is answering this in a way where it's saying you have to align yourself with love. Okay, now that may sound simple and airy-fairy, but the truth is that, the body-mind complex is so sophisticated and subtle that a normal person has a mixture of thoughts in their belief system that aren't based in truth and others some that are. So the real problem here is one of clearing your own consciousness and being very discriminatory. Now, how do you tell the difference between a loving statement that some being's given you or a lie? And it really comes down to having a very fine-tuned inner sense, which everybody's given an inner sense. Okay, but when it's clouded with confusion and belief system, this is when people can be convinced of anything. When Source says you have to align yourself with love, there's certain qualities about love that are consistent and absolute and don't ever deviate, such as a higher being will always be loving. A higher being will always reinforce your own personal sense of choice and power. They'll never tell you what to do. They'll never say, do this, do that. They'll always be guiding you and making you go back to your own self-referral. So having strength in these knowings about what's divine love really about, it's total acceptance, it's total non-judgment. Okay, there's a peace about it, there's a power about it, and very specifically, there's no dogma attached to it. There's no belief systems attached to it. There's no telling you what to do and ordering you around. So you have to get your wits about you in terms of that. And you have to be kind of flushing out any part of your own consciousness that still doesn't believe that about yourself. When you go into a meditation, you can be tricked in meditation as well. I mean, if you're not in that place where you're you don't have a clarity about what God's love really is, then you can attract beings to come into your consciousness even when you meditate that'll tell you all sorts of stuff, and it won't be based on truth, but you'll think it is if you're programmed in any kind of dogma.
Well, indeed, isn't that what happened in the meditation that I spoke about earlier, where these DeathEaters and these ghouls came into my meditation?
Yes, and your fear reaction has a lot to do with you in terms of the impact they had on you, the reaction that you felt, okay, your own vulnerabilities in places which, you have to examine within yourself, okay? But when you align yourself with divine love and you're solid in that knowing, you know your strength and you know what's true. It reminds me of years ago, as I've told you, and I may have told our listeners at different times, there were times when it seemed to be years of learning with me where periodically I'd be confronted with evil beings, whether it was in a dream or mostly it was in a dream, but the dreams coincided with the power going out in my house for real, stuff like that. And the fear and terror that you feel when you're confronted with that kind of energy. But in the dream, something came in my mind that made me blurt out loud in the dream, there's only one God. And whenever I did that, any negative beings just dissolved into nothingness and disappeared. And that was the lesson, and that was the point, that in truth, there's only one God, period. That's the only thing that's real. So when people worry about preparing themselves not to be tricked when they cross over, the business at hand really is to be getting really solid inside yourself in terms of understanding what God's love really is.
Okay, our next question, Aingeal Rose, and it seems to be following a theme here about these archons. If these archons are artificial, I imagine they are somewhat like thought forms. If they steal a speck of your soul and that speck grows, how does your own soul overcome that darkness?
Okay, well, your soul doesn't grow with darkness. Your soul grows with victories. You build a soul. And so let's go back up for a second, because there is a big confusion about the soul. When people say, I'm a soul. No, you're not. You're a spirit. You're a spirit being. You build the soul. The soul energy, the soul accumulation comes from victories that are achieved in your life when you're challenged and you make choices for the good. Your soul energy builds. It builds and builds in power. Okay? So if somebody steals a piece of your soul and they're a dark being, they really can't do anything with it except that you're without a bit of your life force energy. That's really the effect that it has on you. Going back to the Native American soul retrievals is a good example, that we have parts of our souls that fragment off when we go through trauma or something occurs to us that shocks our system. So a piece of our soul energy may fragment off and it gets stuck in different dimensions. And every time you do that and a piece fragments off and is stuck somewhere, you lose some vital life force energy. So it's the same idea that if an archon or some negative energy takes some of your soul essence, you will maybe feel weaker from that experience until you go get it back. But they can't grow that soul energy because, number one, it isn't theirs to use. And number two, your soul doesn't grow through darkness.
Okay. A soul doesn't grow through darkness. Okay, our next question. I listened recently to an Answers from the Akashic Record session by Aingeal Rose called, Is the Tunnel of Light a Trick? This is another question. Now it's from a different person, but it's about that same session that we did. and something has been disturbing me ever since. She was saying that souls clouded by drugs may be taken by archons, or that 50% of compromised souls are taken. Could you ask her to talk about what happens to old people who are dying in hospice care, or anyone on morphine or drugs to ease pain? Does it mean that they too are compromised, as they are not at the full conscious state at the point of death to have the coherence to know the right way to go? It's really bothering me, so if I could get clarification about this from Aingeal Rose, it would really ease my mind.
All right, I'm going to have ask you to read it again. Sorry, Ahonu.
Yeah, well, let me paraphrase it and condense it, because it's from that session that we did and people can find it on YouTube, and it's called Is the Tunnel of Light a Trick? And it was so comprehensive, actually, that we had to create 3 different sessions out of it. So there's 3 different videos there. Many parts of it speak about if somebody is taking drugs, is a drug addict, for example, that they are more vulnerable, their soul energy is more vulnerable to be coerced or distracted in that time period after death than if they had full coherence. So what this person is asking now is, if the person is not addicted to drugs, in other words, it's not a weakness of theirs, but they're old and they're dying in hospital and maybe they're on morphine for pain or something, but they're not in their full conscious awareness at that point of death. Are they also vulnerable in those moments after death? And this person, I think, is a hospice carer. So she says, it's really bothering me and I need clarification on it.
All right. Well, I don't remember saying 50% are taken, but maybe I did. I don't remember what I said there. Sounds pretty severe, but I could have said it. You see, when somebody's really old, chances are they've worked through a lot of issues in their lifetime. Most people. So when most spirits die, they do end up in a good place. Okay, now, if you are on drugs, though, and you're medicated heavily, it does take you a little bit longer to get out of that sticky energy so that your spirit can go to where it's going to go. Now, are you vulnerable in that in-between place? You could be. But it's not a given that everybody would be. And a lot of the answer to this question really does have to do with the individual themselves. I can't generalize and say that that happens to everybody who's on drugs or who's medicated. I do know from the experience when my sister passed that she had been on a general anesthesia with a respirator. So there was some confusion in her when she actually died, where she didn't know, was she coming out of the medicine or had she died? She wasn't sure. And she needed to be talked to. And still, even after that, it took another day or 2 for her spirit to be freed from the sticky environment of the anesthesia. Okay, so you'd have to look at a particular person's records to see where they went after they passed. But I want people to get the message that it's not like the majority of souls end up compromised. Most souls go where they're supposed to go. Some are stuck, some are played with, okay? But it's not the majority, and everybody's different.
Okay, our next question. What do portals do?
Well, it depends what kind of portal you're talking about, but they're doorways to different dimensional spaces. Simply, that's what they are.
Okay, and let me ask my own question to tack on to the end of that. Are they available to us humans, and are they in particular places on the earth, if they are?
They are available to humans. There's many places on the earth where there's portals. Can't list them all now. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of portals. Your own body has portals to other dimensions. Your chakras are portals to other dimensions. But that's what they are. They're openings or doorways to different dimensional spaces.
Okay. Our next question. Can you tell us a little bit more about the WingMakers and the template And that's all I have with this question. I really don't know which template they're referring to. But I wonder, is it the body template, the 15-dimensional chakra system?
Well, I don't know. It's too vague of a question, really. Maybe they could write in and be a little more specific.
Okay. All right, our next question. How much of our personality carries with us from lifetime to lifetime?
Well, a lot of it, actually. A lot of your personality comes through. Because you're at a particular it's all about vibration. So here's an example. When a person has an experience of themselves in a past life, for example, how do they know it's them? So let's say you're looking at a scene of a we're back in France and we're at the Victorian time and we're in a house and there's 5 or 6 different people there and you know yourself as one of those people. Well, how do you know yourself as that person? It's because the one thing that carries through is your frequency. The frequency that is your spirit is the same through different lifetimes. And that can have the same types of personality traits, the same quirkiness, the same sense of humor, the same stubbornness, whatever. Okay, so that can very often carry through. Now, sometimes you come into a lifetime to temper those qualities if they're negative or enhance the positive ones or whatever. But that's the commonality. That's how I know when somebody says to me, was I so-and-so in a past life? And you go into their records. How you can say yes or no is if the vibration is the same. That's the identifying signature. Okay, so the same is true if when somebody's in a relationship and they want to know if the other person is their twin. Well, the way I tell is that the vibration or the frequency is the same with twins. Their identifying signature is the same. If it's not the same, then it's a soulmate.
Okay, our next question is along those same lines, and perhaps it might be useful just to elaborate a little bit on it. If our awareness or our consciousness is limited on Earth, does that limitation carry over into death?
Yes, it does, because this is you. See, the difference is when you die, what you don't have is the density of the body, right? So stuff that the body would carry is dissolved, all right? And you get to know yourself as a spiritual being. So your level of awareness can increase after you die in terms of, like you have a past life review, for example, or you have a life review when you die. So in that, you see things from a different perspective, right? You look back on the life you just lived, you see all the events, you feel your effect on people and their effect on you. So there's realizations that occur and awarenesses that occur when you die. But for most people, when they're born again into a body, they forget all that. And the same challenges they had in terms of their own soul evolution that they didn't complete or they didn't master, very often they've come back to continue on with that process. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So what you have now, though, and just let me say this in terms of evolution, is you have more and more children being born who are remembering. There's a continuation in the memory. They don't forget. But that depends on who their parents are, will determine whether they eventually forget or that remembrance is nurtured. Whereas 10, 20 years ago, the majority of people being born would not have remembered. They forget when they come in. See, we have to remember that we build a soul. This is the point I made earlier. You build a soul, and the job is to come to God realization and to become a God yourself. You have to master things. You have to master every one of the chakras. You have to master the solar system you're in. That's why many people, some have lived on Mars, some have lived on Jupiter, some have lived in the Pleiades. We go to different planets and different solar systems to master the qualities of those places. Earth is a particular planet to master. It's got duality, it's got polarity, it's tempering those things in your consciousness and watching your choices and being able to see what you're choosing constantly is part of your mastery. Things die on this planet, and, there's a point in the mastery where you have to overcome death. I mean, that was the whole point of avatars coming here and going through resurrections and ascensions, is to demonstrate that you overcome death. So, if you take a look at where we are on Earth in our consciousness, it's the minority, the very few minority that understand that. The rest just accept, we're born, we die, this is nature, this is the way it works, and they're in that paradigm. So ultimately, though, to become a God-realized being, mastering death is kind of the last hurrah on Earth. So we keep reincarnating into this dimension so that we can keep mastering it. Now, it's not a given that you always have to come back to Earth. You may go to other places in between. But the point is, we're learning about all the different creations that are in the universe.
Okay. Our final question, Aingeal Rose. I'm struggling with the concept of time and the sequencing of events. If time is an illusion, how can one be a teenager and then a grandparent and then a baby? There has to be a sequence of life, such as a baby, teenager, young adult, parent, middle-aged, and then elderly. If there is a sequence, then there has to be some time, which went from point A to point B to point C.
So where's the confusion?
The sequencing of events. If time is an illusion, how can there be sequencing?
All right. Because we believe in it. Okay. We believe in time. Time is a construct of the mind, as sources told us. So we're really talking about a linear progression of consciousness, right? We believe in past and present and future, and we believe in minutes and hours, and that's how our consciousness thinks and how it moves and how we project into the future. So as long as the collective consciousness is in that paradigm, that's how we're going to view things. If we weren't in that, would it really take so many years to develop a certain way? I mean, what's to stop a cell from maturing and developing within a few minutes as opposed to years and years? So it goes along with the mass consciousness beliefs. And nature, right now, nature is set up in this sort of a cycle. Call it the Fibonacci sequence or whatever you want, but it has an unfolding pattern that's woven into this dimension of consciousness. How do you collapse time when you think about it? Time collapses in your consciousness first. A good example of that is schizophrenics, right? We've all heard stories about someone can be schizophrenic and 1 minute they're one personality and their body's a certain way, and then they shift to another personality and all of a sudden they don't have the disease. And that's an instantaneous shift that goes on, right? Mm-hmm. 1 minute they're sick and they have this issue, and then there's somebody else and the body doesn't register that. So what happens in that process? That's not following a linear progression of time. That's following shifts in consciousness. Do you understand?
Schizophrenia follows shifts in consciousness. Is that what it is?
Yeah, 1 minute I'm Mary Jo and I'm diabetic and I'm not feeling well, and the next minute I'm Sam and I'm not diabetic and I'm perfectly healthy.
Yeah.
And those shifts occur instantaneously.
But that's because the person believes that it's actually
whoever
happening.
The personality is and who they think they are is what manifests physically. So when we look at, or what about the experiments that have been done where they take some DNA of a person and they put it in a petri dish, and then they send that person 600,000 and 700,000 miles away, and then they have somebody project different emotions into this DNA in the petri dish, and as they're projecting different emotions into this person's DNA, the person 600 and 700 miles away is feeling those shifts instantly. 1 minute they're happy, the next minute they're sad. There's no time, there's no travel involved. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It's an instantaneous reaction. What about that? Okay, so those things prove that this evolution of how we develop is also rooted in consciousness. If we can shift personalities and have body changes, and then we can affect DNA instantaneously where time and space don't matter and distance doesn't matter, then it shows you that we're malleable. Consciousness is the thing that does that.
Okay.
Even going back to the whole ascension idea we were just talking about, for example, what makes one person be able to regenerate their body and ascend into a body of light, and another person dies and goes through the death process? It's consciousness. Because the collective consciousness on this planet believes in linear time and thinks in linear time in terms of past, present, and future, as opposed to a vertical reality where you're in a present moment constantly, then we will follow time as a sequence and as a slow unfolding. But one of the things we do see happening in the world today is that where consciousness is being stimulated and activated in such a way where the whole questioning of reality and what is it and what can it do and all of that is now coming into awareness. So we are seeing more miracles. We are seeing things manifest faster for people. You have a thought about something 1 minute, and an hour later, somebody's fulfilling that manifestation, where before it may have taken weeks or years or months.
Will that eventually be instantaneous?
Well, yeah, and oftentimes it is instantaneous. Certainly instantaneous for us and a lot of things lately.
Yes.
Okay, so what happens then? You were not talking about time as a delay and time as something that has to unfold before something can arrive. We're talking about an instantaneous process. So something is happening to time already.
All right, that brings us to the end of our session today. So as is usual, I'm going to read a summary of what we've covered, and we like to call these profundities. They're profound statements from the Akashic records. And we started today with saying that the Pleiades is part of one galactic family. Pleiadians had a hand in the seeding of the flora and fauna of the earth. Some humans who are healers and scientists are of Pleiadian origin. Alpha and Omega refer to the original Father, Mother God, or our divine parents. President Trump's influence on preteen children is not determined yet. However, for teenagers, many are making up their own minds, especially in the areas of human rights. Many teenagers have smarter abilities to discern injustice, but some children are simply wired for militancy. The current presidency is a huge lesson for us in terms of the power of the ego and how our ego reacts to it. President Trump is causing collapse in some areas that are meant to collapse, but we have some oppression coming up that we will have to decide about collectively. Why do you need a law to keep your environment clean? Cleaning your environment outside of government regulation is a form of evolution. We are all responsible for our own reactions. If the whole world becomes oppressed, it is still an incredible opportunity to grow spiritually. The DeathEaters that many are seeing are spectrals and denizens and entities coming from deep within the earth. They appear worse than they are, and their job is to frighten and create fear. They can't sustain their life energy above the surface for very long. We are all here on earth to achieve mastery. Suicide gives one a reprieve from the earth plane, but does not erase the need to achieve mastery. You cannot escape from yourself, and this is the purpose of the plane of reflection after death. Sincerely asking for help from Source or avatars always works. There is no being that forces you back into reincarnation without your permission. Most souls are not tricked into coming back. The experience of the tunnel of light is caused by the collapse of the cells. People need prayers after death to get through the bardo. Aligning yourself with love is the only guaranteed path to discerning truth. The body-mind complex is so complex that much of it is currently not based in truth, but aligning yourself with divine love is strengthening. The qualities of love are consistent and unconditional. Asserting there is only one God is a truthful and real statement. Your soul grows with victories. The soul retrieval of the Native Americans is a perfect example of soul fragmentation that can weaken a soul, but remember, a soul doesn't grow through darkness. Souls can be vulnerable after death, but it is very much up to each individual. Portals are doorways to different dimensional spaces. Our chakras are portals to different dimensional spaces. Much of our personality carries over from lifetime to lifetime. It is the frequency of your spirit that is your energy signature. Much remembrance by young children can be nurtured by aware parents. We can accomplish mastery on many planetary systems. There is a point in self-mastery where we must overcome death. Ultimately, to become a God-man, mastering death is the final hurdle. We believe in time, and the linear progression is a reflection of our state of consciousness. Nature is set up and woven into the cycle of time. Time collapses in our consciousness first. Schizophrenia follows shifts in consciousness. Evolutionary development is rooted in mass consciousness. Consciousness is what is the difference between time-based humans and ascended masters. Manifesting is happening faster because of the growth of the mass consciousness. So I'm going to ask Aingeal Rose to come back now and to say the closing prayer.
All right, thank you, Ahonu.
So that brings us to the end of our session today. Let me remind you that you will find these recordings on answersfromtheakashicrecords.com, and you'll also find them on iTunes and Stitcher Radio, and you will also get the print copies on Amazon.com, and you will also find Kindle versions there also. So until next time, we're saying goodbye from Ahonu and from my lovely Aingeal Rose.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Answers from the Akashic Records, a world of empowerment service from Aingeal Rose and Ahonu. To get the profound statements from the Akashic Records in your mailbox each week, log on to worldofempowerment.com.